Well, all right. We have with us today Melissa Macomber. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yes. When I came across your name and came across what you are really kind of focusing a lot of your energy on, I was like, that is a really good and unique thing to address because it's so easy to just fly under the radar. And that topic being helping adult children navigate the betrayal that they've experienced by a parent who had an affair or had some kind of infidelity. And it's so easy for kids to get lost in all kinds of domestic issues, right?
Sure.
So, can you tell us a little bit of just your own story and how this became something that was very much on your radar?
Sure. Happy to. So I discovered my mom's infidelity actually when I was 13. It was an affair that had gone on for quite a long time with someone in our community. Um, so between 13 and now, the story unraveled. My father found out. They went to counseling and treatment and have ended up staying together. We went through quite a bit with our church, and my mom not being welcome in the church community any longer,
Mm.
which caused quite a crisis of faith for me for quite a while. And eventually, things evened out, I guess. I went on to become a therapist, maybe unsurprisingly. I went on to become a therapist. I worked for about 10 years with teenagers and their families before I got married myself and had my own children. I was blessed to be able to stay home with my kids when they were little. And it was at that time that I started to realize that I needed to tell this story.
Mm.
Um, it was still, even all those years later, was still really bubbling inside. So I started to write a memoir, which I'm still working on. I will keep you posted as it comes to publication. And in the process of writing the memoir, I wanted to reach out to other people who were doing this work, other therapists or social media accounts or researchers, really anybody. And what I found was very little, very, very little in the way of programming or therapy or treatment specifically for children, particularly adult children who were grappling with this issue. I did find some research, some sort of scholarly research, but there was no one synthesizing that research to make it more accessible to families or therapists or the adult children struggling with this. So, if you want something done, you do it yourself. So here I am, using sort of both my personal experience and my professional experience to really try to get the message out there that it is an issue for adult children who struggle with a parent's affair, and often they need help and don't know where to turn.
Yeah. Well, that's so good. I'm curious, what were some of the things that you discovered in the research? What was the research showing about the effects of that dynamic in a home?
Mm. Oh gosh, a lot of different things. Some of the most interesting that children who grow up with a cheating parent are indeed more likely to have some sort of infidelity in their own relationship, either to be the betrayer or the betrayed. And that can happen regardless of the child's opinion. Most kids come out of that situation thinking, well, this will never happen to me. And what the research shows is that it does happen, and it's often because there's not a deep enough dive into the relationship patterns that the child sort of uh, osmosized, just sort of absorbed growing up, that they didn't realize they were absorbing. So that's probably the most important thing in terms of what adult children of infidelity really need to be on the lookout for when they're getting into their own relationships.
Yeah. So now, even in your own story,
Mm,
you had grown up, you're an adult, you got married, you started having kids, and it was at that point that something either resurfaced or something caused you to realize I need to deal with it. What were the things that started to make you realize there was a connection to
Mm,
that pain from childhood that now needed to be addressed?
mm. Well, I had realized it before. So the road to being able to commit to marriage was a hard one for me.
Mm,
I had a lot of trust issues. I had a lot of fears about commitment. And so there was that was sort of the therapy journey, I guess I would say I was on. But after having kids, it became, how do I teach different patterns to my kids, and how do I um, recognize that also the relationship with my parents still needs some work as an adult, and the relationship of myself. Like, if I can't tell this story, this part of me, if I can't be all of me, if I can't be in my own integrity and authenticity, then um, how am I going to be a whole person?
mm, mm.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm just curious because a lot of times we especially when we're still children, we're going to take the path of
Mm,
least resistance, right? Emotionally and all of that. And so sometimes it isn't until later when we now are bearing new adult responsibilities and these other
mm,
things just come up that we go, where'd that come from? Right.
yeah,
And we
sure.
don't realize it's tied to an old trauma or an old wound or something like that. So I was curious about what were some of those things that kind of started to bubble to the surface, but it sounded like it had been a little bit ongoing for you. It wasn't like some massive moment where these things came about. But certainly having children starts to make you think differently, right? In terms of what your legacy carried forward will look like. But I want to go back a little bit further also in your story to when you were a kid, an adolescent. What was that like for you in terms of just even your peer group and your friends? Did you feel like there was a whole part of kind of your life and story that you just had to carry secretly or privately?
Hmm. Yeah, the word that comes to mind is lonely.
Mm,
um, because I did feel like I had to keep it to myself. I was afraid of shaming myself, of shaming my parents, um, of communicating something that I didn't fully understand or really know how to talk about. So yeah, it was very isolating.
What was it like for you, even in your relationship with your parents during those years?
Um, Gosh, so as a teenager, you mean mostly?
Yeah. And even
Yeah,
transitioning into adulthood.
sure. I would say as a teenager, for most of my teenage years, they didn't know that I knew. So there was
Mm,
very much a glass wall, I suppose, if you will, that I knew what was going on and I could see them struggling, but they weren't um, able or interested in talking to me about it at the time. So it wasn't really until maybe I was 18 before we had a more honest conversation about it. I think the hardest part for me was that I didn't agree with the resolution that my parents came to. Um, and that's something I struggled with a lot, and something I hear a lot from other adult children is, at the end of the day, my parents' relationship is theirs, and they're the only ones who can decide what to
mhm.
do. And it's not my right or my place to decide that. But as a teenager, a young adult, it's, you want justice, you want you want what you believe is right. And it was a learning process for me to be able to let go and let my parents have their life, even if it was something I didn't agree with.
Yeah. So as you've gone through this process yourself and then you started wanting to help others, how prevalent would you say this issue is? Like, I mean, if you had to guess, and maybe I don't know if the research gives any numbers on these things, but like how many adult kids are out there right now that this is part of their history?
I don't know. I mean, I have in the course of my research tried to come up with a number, and I haven't gotten very far. Mostly because even the numbers about the amount of couples or even married couples who go through infidelity is widely disputed, because it gets down to what you consider infidelity. And
Mhm.
so, if you could, I think I came up with a statistic at one point that somewhere between 24 and 38% of marriages um, have an infidelity component. So if you take however many of those couples have children and multiply it, I mean,
Mhm.
it's got to be in the millions if you're looking at the world, but certainly in this country, I mean, it's got to just be loads.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about
Mm,
defining terms. When you are wanting to help someone, how do you define that idea or um, that term of a parent's infidelity? Like, what? How do you draw the lines for what that is?
mm. For me, I work with a definition that has more to do with the child. And when I say child, I really mean of any age. And it gets to the level of betrayal that the child feels. And that can really vary depending on a lot of different things, the gender of the child, the gender of the parent who is the betrayer versus the betrayed, the actual act that was committed and how that played out in the family, if the affair partner was part of the community or not. I mean, it goes on and on. So the child or the adult child can feel terribly betrayed or not terribly betrayed. And so it almost doesn't matter the act that's committed, if you will. It has more to do with the level of betrayal that the child feels. And that often gets to um, the way they're treated by the parent in the wake of the infidelity.
How is that? How is that similar but different from the betrayal that the spouse feels that has been betrayed? Like, how is it? How is the what the child is feeling maybe somewhat similar to what the betrayed spouse is feeling, but also how is it unique as a child?
That's a great question. Um, well, so when two people get married, right, they take a commitment or a vow to be faithful to each other, and by extension, that vow or that promise extends to the child, whether or not it's ever spoken.
Mhm.
So in that way, the child feels the same breach of trust that, say, a betrayed spouse will feel. The way I think that it can be different is that it can get more into, I guess, family dynamics, because the when there is a betrayal of that sort, it's often because there's something else going on with the couple already. And so that's going to get, the child is going to feel that as well. And I don't know if that's correct, because of course the betrayed spouse is going to feel that as well.
Well, let me ask you this, let me ask it to you this way, because as you're saying that,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, okay, I'm trying to think of the 8, 10, 12-year-old kid that,
Mm,
discovers this, however, whether they're told this or they just find out. And it feels to me like maybe in that family dynamic, there is a power difference
mm,
between the betrayed spouse and the betrayed child. The
mm-hmm.
betrayed spouse can feel betrayed, but they are not without power, right? They
Mm-hmm.
can make decisions, they can make choices about where that relationship goes. A child is totally powerless in that. So it feels like that's an additional, they might not recognize their powerlessness, but they can't do anything about it, right?
Right. Yes, I think that's a great point, and that's a huge part of it, is that regardless of what the child believes or thinks or feels, for the most part, they're stuck in that situation, and they can't, until they hit adulthood, they can't remove themselves.
And even when you hit adulthood, is there still a part of you because of that dynamic of being your parent's child, even though you're an adult, that you mentioned it earlier, that's their relationship.
Mhm.
And so you're still powerless in their relationship, even though you may have power of choice you can make now in terms of where you live and what you do. Um, Man, I feel like that's a hard thing to navigate. Can you talk about why or what does that look like in the healing process, and maybe where does forgiveness come in
Mm,
to
mm,
that idea of I didn't have any say in this either way, and I have been betrayed. So in order for me to move on, how can I do that apart from forgiveness?
right, right. Well, you mentioned the other piece that the family dynamics can come in, especially for an adult child, is sometimes, or I've seen it a lot, the adult child can play the role of the confidant
Mm,
for one or both of the parents. It's typically the betrayed, but not always. Um, And especially as an adult child, where the parent might feel, oh, well, the child is an adult and can take care of themselves and so can be more of a friend to me. But often that's just not the case. It's still, it's still your parents. It's still, you still have not only an emotional reaction to what's going on, but you need to heal yourself, and can't be that confidant for your parent. So some of that in terms of healing is, if there's any of that going on, making sure that you can set up some boundaries that are very clear about, Mom, I love you and I want to spend time with you, but we can't have this conversation, or I can't, you need to talk to your friend about this, or your therapist, or somebody else, because I can't be that confidant for you. So that's one way and boundaries, I think, in general, can be very important for an adult child to really get some distance and get some space to heal.
Yeah. So what are some of the most common effects on children when a parent, has an affair?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that
Uh,
every situation has its own uniqueness, but just kind of in the bell curve of like, what are the most common effects that happen to a child when, whether they are consciously aware of those effects or not, what are the most common effects?
mm-hmm. um, Gosh, well, I'd start with the basics. So the emotions, the feelings of anger, of betrayal, of um, often, especially for younger children, that could come out as in ways such as not wanting to say "I love you" to their parents, not wanting even to call dad, but maybe to call him by his first name. So there's a lot of behavior that makes an effort at distancing the child from the parent. And then the flip side of that is the sort of what they call a fever break, where everything will be calm for a while, and then all of a sudden there will be this outburst. And this can be for teenagers and adult children as well. Everybody seems to be dealing, everything's going fine, and then, I don't know, the kettle boils over, or something completely having nothing to do with the affair happens, and boom, it pops. And that's largely because it's such a taboo topic. It's something that is so not discussed. Even if it's discussed within the family, it's largely not discussed in your communities or in society. So there's no other outlet, right? There's no other place
Mhm.
for the steam to escape. So
Yeah.
that's part of it. Mm-hmm.
So obviously, anytime, I mean, you mentioned it before, right? Marriage is a union where there's a vow that is taken, there is a commitment of faithfulness there. And when that gets broken, it does not just affect that singular relational unit, it affects the whole family. You could even say it's not even just within the immediate family, it affects, you know,
Oh,
the family
yeah,
at large, the extended family. But
yeah, 100%.
I want to talk about, where can an adult child even start when it comes to healing? Like, how does
Mm,
healing start? Because, as we've been talking here, I've been imagining all these various scenarios where I go, man, I have seen this over and over and over again in people's lives,
mm,
where I can, as just an objective outside observer, can go, I know why you're actually spinning out of control with that alcohol or with that over there, or
yeah,
why all of you're a serial dater that breaks up after 3 months and all. And it's kind of like, but they may not recognize that this is totally tied to that trauma and that betrayal, the anger you talked about, the hurt, all that.
yep.
So maybe not only where does healing start, but generally how, and what are some maybe signs for an adult child to look for that they've got some unhealed, unresolved wounds that need to be dealt with here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to start with your last bit about sort of what the signs are, and your examples of the adult child who keeps getting into relationships and getting out. I would say the number one sign is an inability to trust. And it
Mm,
doesn't just have to be in romantic relationships. It can be with friends, it can be with people at work, it can be with um, pretty much any situation where you feel like being your whole self would be unsafe, or would not feel good to you, either because you fear sort of retribution, or that someone is going to leave you in the way that perhaps you felt left or betrayed. um, so I would say that's a big one. And people deal with trust issues in a lot of different ways, right? It can be with alcohol, or with drugs, or with serial dating. I mean, there are any number of different band-aids that people try to use for that, of course. So in terms of healing, though, I mean, I always start with know that you're not alone, and don't let yourself be alone. That find somebody to talk to, find a confidant, somebody that you can share the whole story with, and recognize that um, it's worth telling that story. It's worth getting it off your chest, and to know that however you feel is okay, no matter how angry, how distrustful, you may feel like you hate your parents, and know that you don't, but just know that that level of anger and that vitriol is so normal, and it will pass. Like it won't last forever. So rather than trying to skate over it and pretend that you don't feel it, it'll take longer if you don't acknowledge that it's there. So really acknowledging how you feel, I think, is the first step, and getting some kind of connection that feels safe to you is the first step.
Yeah, and I imagine there's maybe like a kind of a pathway or a process to this. And what I'm hearing you say is it starts with the individual and saying, okay, what are the things that I can actually address independently of my relationship with my parents if they're still living or whatever. And so what are some other things that a an adult child needs to work on in terms of that healing and just their own wholeness and health before they ever even consider if there are certain things in the dynamic of their relationship with their parents that they need to address?
Yep. Yep. Good question. I think the next thing is to get some, if you feel that you need some space from your parents, as I mentioned before, to take that and to set the boundaries that you need to set, to get that. And that is going to be very specific to each child and each family. And it's probably going to it could feel really bad, both on both ends. Like the parents are probably not going to like it, and in many ways the adult children aren't going to like it may feel like abandoning your parents. It may feel like you're leaving them at their time of need. And it's a tough balance, because it's not that it's wrong to be there for your parents. It's just you also have to protect your heart. And if you are struggling or confused about your relationship with your parents, sometimes a little bit of space from them is the um, thing that will help you process it. So there's
Hmm.
that as well.
Yeah, and then what might it look like with the relationship with the parents? And I want to ask you this on two fronts. One
Okay.
is with the parent, and I'm thinking mainly of the parent that committed the betrayal, like trying to work on that relationship. Because I feel like there's probably already a little bit of solidarity between a child and the betrayed spouse. So I'm thinking mainly about the betrayer. Um, and two things. One is, what does it look like maybe in dealing with that relationship when that parent is repentant versus when they are unrepentant?
Mm, yeah, it kind of hinges on that. And I think you know more about the healing in a couple environment than I do, but my understanding is that repentance, without that, you don't get very far.
Hmm.
And I think that is the same with a child, with an adult child. If there is no true ownership of the infidelity or of the behavior, whatever it is, if there's no true ownership and true apology, then I think it's pretty tough for a child to move forward with any kind of real relationship, like any kind of real sort of emotional connection. I think
Yeah.
that's pretty tough.
At
Hmm.
that point is probably where you've got to make sure you establish healthy boundaries and those kind of things. What are some of the what as you even in your own life, but also as you've been working with others that are in this? What are some of the common either roadblocks or obstacles or fears that are part of this healing process? Like where do people get stuck? Where might adult children get stuck on the healing journey?
Hmm. Um, I see a couple of places. I see the boundaries being one, that they continue to get sucked into their parents, um, either sort of being between their parents and getting sucked into being a middleman between their parents as an adult. And that's a really hard thing to get out of because it feels like, again, like you're abandoning your parents. So that's one. The second one I see is particularly when you get into romantic relationships, it's the not truly understanding the patterns that you grew up with, in terms of I always say, don't worry less about, um, who did what to whom, and worry more about the interactions between your parents. Like,
Mm,
what did you learn about when to say, I love you? Or what did you learn about, um, the kind of conversation that you have over dinner, and what did you learn about how a husband supports a wife and a wife supports a husband, because those signposts, if you will, even if they had nothing to do with the infidelity, are going to help you realize what is programmed into your brain without you realizing it, and what you are probably repeating in your relationships without realizing it. And until you get conscious of that, of those patterns, then you're not going to be able to change them.
that's good.
Mm-hmm.
What are some? I mean, you're the one that knows this path really well. You're the one that knows this context really well. What have we not addressed that you want to address? Is there anything else that you wanted to say in relationship to this idea of trying to help adult children who have faced, the parents' infidelity that maybe we haven't covered yet in the conversation?
Oh gosh. No, I think we've done pretty well actually in terms of, I guess the only thing I would add is you mentioned forgiveness, which
Mm,
is, that's the place that everybody wants to get to. I would caution. I always think of forgiveness as something that you can offer forgiveness right away, but you can't fake trust.
yeah,
So, um, sometimes it's helpful for adult children to think about the difference between those things. That you can look at your parents and appreciate that, that they're human, and that for whatever reason they've gotten into this mess and it's painful and it's, problematic. But at the end of the day, they're human and worthy of forgiveness. That doesn't mean you have to trust them
yeah.
yet, until their behavior is worthy of that. Um, so I would offer that as a way to think about the difference between those two things.
Yeah. And sometimes we can offer forgiveness right away without fully realizing what it means to forgive, to fully release that right for a pound of flesh, right? So there's a sense
Correct.
in which
Yes.
even there's still an ongoing journey of going, do I really understand how forgiveness is meant to release me from the
Yeah.
shackles that I've been, trapped in?
Oh,
Well, Melissa, this has
100%.
been a great conversation. I want to give you an opportunity also just to thinking of any of our listeners out there that find themselves in this context. They go, that's me. I'm an adult child of my parents, being unfaithful. In fact, maybe some of our listeners are going, and I'm in a relationship that's sort of perpetuated that, whether it's me or the other person. And I
Mm,
want to break that cycle. And maybe they're feeling burdened. Maybe they're feeling hopeless. Maybe they're wondering if they can even understand some of the connections that are between all these things. What word of hope would you want to give to those who are out there that are just feeling like, I want to take a next step, but I wonder if it's even worth it?
mm. Oh gosh, it's absolutely worth it. 120%. I mean, I as someone who has gone through the journey, I've been married for 25 years. I am so happily through this process that it is so worth going through it. Even though it really is hard and painful, and, um, it's not going to feel worth it sometimes, I don't think,
Hmm.
but I will tell you, it is possible. It's not a dead end street. It's absolutely possible. Um, so I would say that in terms of, help, um, therapy is a great option. I highly recommend therapy. Just make sure that your counselor has an understanding of betrayal trauma. Um, And if you like, I have a couple of different organizations that I recommend, not any one specific therapist, but just groups that are well versed in betrayal trauma that could be a resource for people. Um, and if you want a place to start, I have a blog where I have synthesized all of the research that I've been able to find that's out there into easily digestible posts. And it's all free, and it's at the very least a place to start in terms of educating yourself and learning a bit more, and really realizing that you're not alone and this is not something that you need to do by yourself.
Yeah. Well, Melissa, this has been a great conversation. So, where can our listeners and viewers go to learn more about you and what you just mentioned about your blog?
Yeah, thank you. My website is melissamacomber.com, and I obviously can send you the link. I would also add that I am trying to figure out some kind of service to provide for adult children of infidelity. And at the moment, I'm interviewing people. It's just a free 30 minutes over Zoom where I ask a few questions. You can answer, it doesn't have to be your whole story. You can answer to the level that you feel comfortable. But I'm trying to get a sense of what do people really need? What do adult children really need? And what would be the right kind of forum for that kind of healing?
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for entering into this space, Melissa, and also just thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, listeners and viewers, we're going to put Melissa's website in the show notes. And then, because we want to help you take your next best step to wholeness in Christ. And we really want to see the healing that you need. Maybe you've been carrying this burden, and just today you realized that's the connection. I didn't realize that my parents' infidelity is having a direct, immediate, right now impact on the way I'm living my life and the things I'm facing. So hopefully there's been some breakthroughs here, and we want to help you take that next step. And we look forward to seeing you back here again next time on the Pure Sex Radio program. Take care.